When we dive into this series on courage, I'm amazed at how many of us talk ourselves out of things that God is asking us to do. I'm running guys my age all the time, looking back in their lives with regrets because they were gutless cowards. So in 2001, I sensed God moving on my heart to move our family in 2001. And I didn't know what that meant, but we had 9 living grandparents in our area. My wife, I was born in the area. My wife went to high school there. Those were our people. We had deep roots of 40 years worth of roots. Well, going back to 1935, so almost a century's worth of roots at the time, 80 years. And so in 2002, I thought, this thing that's going to happen is going to be so big, I need to do something. So I'm going to go to the Bible. I do what I do every time when I'm scared to death. I go to the Bible, and I'm going to study every time in the Bible the word courage is mentioned. And I have a New American Standard, and in that Bible there were 47 references to courage. And if you remove redundancies, for example, be strong and courageous in Joshua is mentioned 15 times. So I just removed that and made that one, right? So I ended up having 29 references. So about basically a month's worth of references about courage. And I read each passage and I journaled it, what it meant to me. And there were some very deep and meaningful things there. And a year later, God called us to move my family, 2 rats, 2 dogs, 2 cats, 3 boys, all under 7, to Oregon. And we've been in the same house since 2003. And then in 2011, in Sisters, Oregon, in a coffee shop, God called me out of youth ministry and to work with men. I didn't know what that meant. But to me, the call to work in men was different than a call to pastor a church. So I wrestled with what that looked like. I kind of knew what God was going to call me to, and I was scared to death because I knew it was going to cost me a lot and cost my family a lot. So I said, I got to go back to courage. I got to read this. So I went back to courage, and I did the same thing I did before. This time I took the NIV and the New American Standard. I came up with 57 references to courage. So I went back through. I pulled out all the redundancies, and I journaled again. And in the process of journaling, I realized 4 things stood out about courage that I did not realize before. Four attributes of courage that nobody tells you. But if you dive deep into the word like I had done it, God revealed this to me. So this was an anchor for my faith. And so as I've lived this out, this has been a game changer. And so Guts and Manhood came out. So that's where this book has come from. I want to talk about that tonight. I want to talk about this first attribute of courage, but before I do, I want to share with you 3 myths of courage, 3 things about courage that you may not know. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 27, Paul says, I discipline my body and make it my slave. You know, we often forget, guys, that God has called us to steward the bodies He gave us so that we'll be ready, healthy, and spiritually dangerous to fight the good fight, whether it's working at your job, serving your God, protecting your bride, or being a great dad to your kids. That's why we're so excited to partner with Mountain Tough Fitness Lab. Mountain Tough Fitness Lab is run by Christian men who are passionate about training you to be your best version and to stay dangerous and ready for God. Join me on my journey by going to mountaintough.com and getting your free 6-week trial when you type in the code ARENA30. You won't be disappointed. Stay dangerous. You're a non-Christian dude. You give your life to Jesus, and when you give your life to Jesus, God throws a party, and at this party, He gives you gifts, right? Well, this is not one of them. Courage is not one of those gifts. It's never something that God gives upon salvation. It's never listed in any of the lists of salvation. The next one is this: courage is not a fruit of the Spirit. So if you look at Galatians chapter 5, verse 22, it says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. 9 things, courage is not one of them. If you go to the Mosaic Law, which is the 10 Commandments and everything listed in the Torah, which is Leviticus, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, if you go and look in there, there are 10 Commandments and there are 613 Mosaic laws. And courage is not one of them. It's just not there. It's not a fruit of the Spirit. It's not in the Mosaic Law. It's not a spiritual gift. So what is it? What is this? So what I want to share is in those 57 times that courage is mentioned, the words take or took courage, gather courage is found twice, found courage is found twice, keep courage is found twice, take or took courage is found 18 times. When I discovered that, I realized that courage is actually, the first attribute of courage is a call to action. Courage is something that starts with God saying, I want you to do this, or a situation. Today I did a Bible study. I did a Bible study about this with a 17-year-old who's got cancer, really bad, and he's paralyzed. And we're talking about this. And I said, your cancer is a call to action for you. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to let it define you? C.S. Lewis said, courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, which means at the point of highest reality. Isn't that cool? So there's a testing point, there's a hinge point where God calls you to act, and you have to go to the next attribute, which is to make a personal choice, which we're going to learn about that next week. Tension is the call to action where courage is conceived. In other words, courage, this is the part that really rocked my world. Courage is given, and men must take it. And 18 times in the Bible, we're commanded to take courage. And not one time in the Bible does God ever give courage. In Haggai 2:4, listen to this. But now, take courage, Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Take courage also, Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and all of you people of the land. Take courage, declares the Lord, and work, for I am with you, declares the Lord of hosts. 3 times we see it, right? So Matt, when you were in high school, when you were in my youth group, the favorite game that we played was Hume Lake. The favorite game we played was Kajaba Can. So when I moved to Oregon, I brought about 50 straps, seatbelt straps tied in knots on either end. So you have a 3-foot-long strap with a knot tied at the end, and you just take a 55-gallon trash can, you put it in the middle, you put 40 boys around that trash can holding on to straps, and somebody's going to break a collarbone every time. I mean, the injuries, because the object of Kajabe Can is if you slack the strap to get somebody's hand out, you're out. If you let go of the rope, you're out. If you hit the trash can, you're out. I'm a big, strong guy. I was never going to get close to that trash can. But what killed me was the grip. The grip. Because when you get done with this game, you cannot move your fingers. I mean, I have seen girls' are brutally competitive. Girls' hands bleeding. I had to take a girl, I had to take the police chief's here at the time, Ron Noble, his daughter, all the way down to Fresno for concussion because she just would not give in. You know what I mean? I mean, this game was aggressive, but you couldn't let go. And that game reminds me of courage. You have to take it, and you have to declare that you will never let it go. You will never say no to God, and you'll hold on to it come hell or high water. It's like what the TCU coach once said, Dutch Meyer. He said, we will fight till hell freezes over, then we'll fight on ice. That's courage. We're going to fight till hell freezes over, and we're just going to keep fighting. Put on the roller skates, baby. Get the hockey sticks. Courage is not an emotion. This impacted me this week when I was putting this together. God really spoke to me. I never knew this before yesterday. Courage is not an emotion. It is an emotion-causing catalyst. Let's look at some memorable scenes found in 3 of the 4 Gospels. Let me explain this. So when I say yes to God, there's no emotion. If I live my life like I'm just going to say yes, there's no emotion attached to that. It's objective. It's not subjective. It's unemotional. It's, forgive the word, it's stoic. But if I am a person who's going to negotiate and hesitate, I'm going to walk through life fearful. I'm going to walk through life with anxiety, which is a word I never heard before the last 10 years. Now I hear it all the time. Everybody's got this disease called anxiety. And I'm not discounting that because 1 out of 5 people suffer anxiety and are medicated. Courage, though, is an unemotional realization to respond to the call to action. Emotion is the enemy of courage. Think about that for a second. Emotion is the enemy. When God says take courage, he doesn't ask you to pray about it, think about it. He just says do it. It's a call to action. It's unemotional in its response. But when my wife talked me into, when my wife and my son were going to go ride the Guardians of the Galaxy ride at Disneyland, I was like, hell to the no. I don't go up and down. It created a bunch of emotion in me. But then an hour later, or 4 hours later, I told my wife, okay, she's just adrenaline junkie. I go, I will do it with you. And once I made that decision, there was no emotion. Well, until I only had one hand to hold on, I was screaming like a baby. But that's a whole different story. But the emotion was removed in making the decision. So Mark 6, so now remember, there are 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. A gospel is simply an account of Jesus' life. Gospel means good news. 4 Gospels. Mark was the shortest and the oldest gospel with 16 chapters. Matthew is the kingly. Mark was written through the eyes of Peter. So Peter dictated the book of Mark to Mark. So when you read Mark, that's Peter's gospel. That's really important. Matthew was written to Jews to prove that Jesus was the king of the Jews. Luke came along later. Luke was a non-Jewish doctor. He wrote a gospel that said, all of you pagan guys with your uncircumcised penises, you can come to heaven too. That's literally true back then. Sorry about the penis comment, but it was literally true. So you Gentiles can come too. God's thrown a party. The women can even come. Everybody can come. And then John came by several years later to battle a guy named Cerinthus in a heresy called Gnosticism, and he wrote about Jesus as God. But when we read Peter's gospel, we have to realize that Peter dictated to Mark. All right? You guys tracking? Very, very important. So in Mark 6:50, we see Jesus saying, so he's walking on the water, the Sea of Galilee is raging, and they see this ghostly figure walking, and it says they're afraid. If you look at the story, which I'm not going to go into, they're terrified. They see Jesus, they think it's a ghost. Jesus says, "Take courage, it is I." In John and Matthew, something really significant happens. Does anybody know what it is? Peter goes, "Hey, yo, if that's really you, call me to come out of the boat." And he goes, "All right, Pete, come on, bro." And Peter walks out. You know the story. He takes his eyes off Jesus. He starts to sink. But now here's the part that really impacted me. So here we see, so to me, if I'm sitting in a boat with a bunch of other fishermen and this fisherman dude jumps out of the water in a storm, that's going to be significant to me. That's a ballsy move. Would you agree? So don't you think you're going to tell that story? I watched Peter walk on water. Well, Matthew said, heck yeah, I'm telling that story. John said, man, we're telling that story. But Mark doesn't tell the story. So I'd had to ask myself, why would Peter dictate this story to Mark and leave out the most epic part? Any thoughts? Isn't that weird? Well, yes! So here's my question though. Dude, you walked on water. You walked on water. To me, that's going to be the first part of the story. But see, that's not the story to Peter. Yes, he was Peter. He jumped out in an impetuous maneuver that looked very gutsy and courageous. But then he saw the storm. His courage turned to fear when he took his eyes off Jesus. So I believe Peter saw this as an epic failure. But we aren't seeing this as an epic failure. Here's the point. The point is this. Sometimes we will see the things we do as an epic failure, even though they're calls to courage and they're acts of courage. But God doesn't care what everybody else sees. He just cares, will you do what he asks? We live in a world that is polluted by men who are not saying yes to Jesus. Christian men. Christian men. And here's the deal, it's hurting the church, but worse, it's hurting the Christian men. The National Institute of Mental Health, over 40 million adults in America suffer from anxiety. Commonwealth Fund, 25% of U.S. adults report having mental health diagnoses such as anxiety, depression, or emotional distress. Center for Disease Control surveyed adults who experienced anxiety symptoms in the past 2 weeks were 19.5%. The conclusion from this to me is that 1 out of every 4 of you in this room is suffering some kind of mental disorder like anxiety or depression. I'm not downplaying that at all. I'm not downplaying that. But what I'm saying is, I just wonder when I read this passage, if I could offer one piece of advice for men who suffer from this, if we could just say yes to Jesus and don't let emotion come in at all. If instead of like worrying about all of the problems of this life, if we just said yes to him, I think that's one little thing that could really help us. I know it helped me personally. I know it helped me. But I think sometimes when we get into this negotiation and hesitation, it leads us down a path, a darker path of putting ourselves on the throne. And so, and I'm not talking about biological, chemical issues with people. I'm talking about psychological things that we talk ourselves into. So this call to action becomes courage when we trust God fully and act without hesitation. Are you hearing this a lot? Act without hesitation or negotiation. Hesitation and negotiation results in paralyzation. And paralyzation takes us down a dark emotional path. So you look at Matthew 14:25 and John 6:20 for that story of walking on the water. And again, in every story there, every one of them records Jesus saying, take courage. Because courage must be taken. It's taken. Nobody will give you courage. It has to be taken. This is a revelation for me. When I realized that these two major life events for me, I said, I just have to take this thing. Nobody's going to give me courage. Nobody's going to give me help. God, I don't know if you know this. There's not a person in the Bible that God gave courage to. I looked. You may say Gideon. No, he didn't give. You find it. God didn't give Gideon courage. God called Gideon to a higher level, and Gideon said yes. God never gave anyone courage. God called them to take it. To me, that was revelatory. I just thought, God, give me courage, God, give me courage. I'm not going to ask for something from God that he's not going to give me that he never gave anybody else. Instead, I say to God, God, help me to take courage. Help me to say yes. Help me to be a man who doesn't negotiate. Help me to be a man who doesn't hesitate. I'm wrong all the time. Sometimes wrong, never in doubt. Sometimes wrong, never in doubt. Sometimes fail, never hesitate. And that's served me well because that's trusting for me. So here's what this is a short message tonight. I told our leaders it's a short message. I just want to close with this. God, this is the thing. I'm so in tune with this statement. God, this is horrible English. Forgive me for this horrible English. God is never not calling you. God is never not calling you out of the water. Never. He's always beckoning. He's always calling. And I guess conversely, you could say there's never not a storm. There's always going to be a storm. And God is always calling us into it. And I wish I could say that we're going to experience flat waters, and we do experience that on occasion. But anybody who's got any kind of life underneath them, you know what I mean, realizes that we are always in a storm, and God is always calling us out into the water to walk on it, to keep our eyes on him. So my question tonight is for you guys. Hopefully tonight you feel freed because God, through his word, is empowering you to take something that you don't have to pray for. He's telling you to take it. So the question is, in your life, is there some area where God is asking you to take it? This call to action, he's saying, grab hold of courage, take courage, gather courage. Joseph Arimathea, when Jesus was crucified, Joseph Arimathea, the Bible says, he gathered his courage and went and asked for the body of Jesus and buried it in the tomb of his family. He had to gather the courage. He had to go get it. He had to go. Some of us, our courage is scattered, and you're like, I gotta hold on to it. We got to take it, gather it, bring it in, hold on to it. So is there an area in your life tonight? And honestly, guys, don't think big. Let's just start with small stuff. Is there just a small area of your life right now where God is saying, dude, just take it right now? Like just one small area in your life. Is there a small area God is saying, do you trust me with this one area? Take that right there. And just start with something that you can get a win on. God's not asking you to start some nonprofit organization for men and let your house go into foreclosure. Nothing's usually that dramatic at first. But what's that thing God is calling you to?